You're listening to Inside the Village, where all news is local and no topic is off limits.
So help me, Bob, it's bully in the alley. Hey, bully in the alley. So help me, Bob.
Welcome to Inside the Village for Wednesday, February the 14th, 2024. I'm Scott Sexsmith alongside Michael Friscolanti, editor-in-chief here at Village Media. Derek Turner, executive producer of the show, is here as well. And February 14th, Valentine's Day, love is in the air.
It's always love in the air down here.
It's like a love fest.
I love you, buddy.
I love you too, man. Derek, we love you.
That's enough. Okay, I read the script. Move
Okay,
along.
that's it. Enough of that. Some interesting Valentine's Day facts.
Oh.
Are you ready for this?
When you hold your phone like this and put your...
It's serious. 25% of pet owners give Valentine's Day gifts to their pets.
No, they don't.
It's not wrong.
Like what? Like a...
I don't know. I don't have a pet.
Is it on the internet?
No, it's not
you're
there.
Looking at?
But I'm sure you could find that out.
That's good.
How many cards do you think are exchanged each year? Any guesses?
In the world?
In the world.
10 million?
That is not correct. The answer is 145 million cards are exchanged each year. Over, and this was astounding to me, 58 million pounds of chocolate and candy purchased yearly. And who do you think gets the most Valentine's Day cards?
I don't know.
I think husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend.
The boss?
The boss. Good answer. Not wrong.
Not wrong?
Not right. Teachers.
Teachers. They have it made.
Well,
Christmas, Valentine's Day.
When you think about it, especially in the younger grades, remember teachers used to make Valentine's Day cards with us in class? Mm-hmm. So multiply that by the number of classes that any teacher could have. Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
I see. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
All right.
So if you've been a teacher for 35 years and teaching grade 4 and you've done Valentine's every year, it's a lot of Valentines.
It's a lot of Valentines. And for the record, lovebirds are actually birds.
Yes. For the record, too, I did not send you a Valentine or Derek, even though I thought about sending Derek one.
Well, it's the thought that counts. Okay, big show today. We're going to talk about affordable housing in Southern Ontario, specifically Cambridge, Kitchener, Waterloo region. Before we do that, the first word to Frisco and the story of international students just simply will not go away.
Inside the Village is on the radar this week. So as everyone remembers, we had Sioux College President David Orzetti in here. It was our second conversation with somebody about the international student cap that the federal government announced. And what David talked was a pretty detailed, long conversation. But what he did say, he got into the discussion about bad actors, right? Because the federal government's trying to crack down on bad actors.
Right.
These are the colleges that are maybe not playing by the rules as much as they could. He called out, he said there are institutions that the government knows about that are both public and private that are the bad actors. And he specifically mentioned Conestoga College and called them out for what he said was some practices that he wouldn't endorse. He specifically said that they brought 30 some odd thousand students to that community and it's overwhelmed the housing there. And he basically called them out. He was pretty blunt about the fact that he considers them one of the bad actors. Last night, or yesterday afternoon, the president of Conestoga College had a press conference or had some kind of event, public event, and had some harsh words for Mr. Orzetti.
Well, you want to talk about being blunt. Here's what John Tibbetts, the president of Conestoga College, said last night, and I am quoting here. Like Orzetti, why are his goddamn students in Toronto? Why not up there? Talk about a whore. I mean, he's taking a percentage of the profits of an operation. And I can't stand the guy, by the way.
Yeah, he did.
End quote. He minced no words.
He minced no words. And just to be clear, what Orzetti's saying, called them out for what he said was way too many students. They bring in thousands and thousands. And now he's saying, well, what about Sioux College's the partnership with a private college, 2 private colleges down in the GTA?
Right.
And he's saying, well, you're getting a percentage of the profits off those. Why are you doing that? Why don't you just focus on your school in Northern Ontario? So a lot of arguing going on, and it just shows the emotion that and the concern at these colleges and universities about this new cap, right? International students are a major source of revenue for schools all over the country. They know they're going to lose some of that revenue, and I think it's starting to boil over. Yeah, interesting though to see that someone's that our conversation could trigger such a heated argument.
See, people do watch.
They sure do.
Important people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you and I are just going to sit back and watch this unfold, but the ball clearly now is in David Orazzetti's court. All right, let's move on to Guelph and Isabel Buckmaster's story on a Jane Doe in that city.
Yeah, this is one of those stories that we talk about as a news team a lot when we chat about the way we cover stories and the stories we pursue. We often... There's things in our community that we just kind of take for granted. We drive by all the time, or we know it's there, and people kind of know what it is and know what the story is, but they don't really know. And Isabel does a great job of sort of digging into one of those stories in her community. I guess there's a memorial to a Jane Doe on a Highway 7 rest stop just outside Rockwood, Ontario, and it was the remains of somebody unknown between the ages of 25 and 45. They were found there almost 20 years ago. And there was a memorial set up and to try to keep this case alive, because they still don't know who this person is all these years later. And it's a story of about a gentleman who quietly does the work of maintaining this memorial. Mm-hmm. And so Isabel goes there, talks to him, and it tracks him down and gets him to explain why he's invested in this, why he does this. And it's a beautiful story, and again, we cover breaking news all the time, but it's more than that. This is a story just about something that everybody who's reading this story say, oh, I go by there all the time, as I've seen that rest stop, and now they know the full story behind it. And it's a great little piece of journalism, and it's a super good story.
All right, and finally to the city of Sudbury. It was January 27th that Councillor Michael Vagnini was declared missing, and sadly yesterday he was discovered dead.
Yeah, sad news. It broke late in the late afternoon, but it was up on our sites shortly thereafter. And, we've seen this so many times. As a journalist, you cover these stories that evolve over a few weeks. And a lot of suspicion was that obviously he'd met a terrible end because he'd been missing for so long, no sign of him. And, of course, they did find his body. They don't suspect foul play. That's what the police are saying. It's a sad ending, though. You always kind of hold out hope that there'll be some miracle and that they'll turn up somewhere and be okay. That said, I have to give credit to our team in Sudbury, which I may have mentioned already on the show, but our team in Sudbury under editor Mark Gentili really did a great job of going after this story every day, whether it was reaching out to police, reaching out to family, reaching out to people who knew them. They knew that it was the thing in Sudbury that everyone was interested in, so they kept it in the news every day. They made sure to update people. Even if there wasn't much to say, they let people know that, right? Like I said, obviously family and friends are hoping for a happier ending, but at the same time, at least it gives some sense of an answer of what happened here.
Yeah. Okay, on today's show, we're going to talk about affordable housing in the Kitchener-Waterloo, Cambridge area, and a unique idea that seems to be gaining some traction. Scott Hamilton, Cambridge City Councillor, we've had on the show previously, and Brian Doucet from the University of Waterloo going to be joining us. But it really is an interesting concept when you think about it.
Yeah, I hadn't really heard about this till recently, but basically it's an idea that's kind of gaining steam in Southern Ontario in some communities, where the idea is to use municipal parking lots and build on top of those lots, but keep the lot.
Right.
So housing over parking, basically. And there's some drawings that have been put out there by some architecture firms saying what this could look like. The idea being that it's the best of both worlds. The municipality keeps their parking spots, but there's a place to build some of this affordable housing. From what I understand, it's a couple communities are looking into it, and I believe the Guelph mayor talked about wanting to do it there. So it's kind of a story, an idea gaining steam, really interesting. So we're going to have a chat about it, and here I'll figure out what it is.
All right. Think of apartments on stilts.
Yes.
That might be the best way to describe it.
That's right.
Scott Hamilton and Brian Doucet join us next when Inside the Village returns right after this.
Reporters, editors, and journalists who go the extra mile to get the story and get it right. Go behind the scenes with those who cover the stories that matter most to you and your community. Look for it in the Village Features section of your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Back on Inside the Village with Michael Friscolanti, Editor-in-Chief here at Village Media. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Excited to have on the show with us, first of all, return guest, Cambridge City Councillor Scott Hamilton, and Brian Doucet. Brian is a Canada Research Chair and Associate Prof at the University of Waterloo. Thanks to both of you. Good to see you both.
Thanks so much for having us. Really appreciate it.
Let's talk about this new concept called housing over parking. Scott, I'd like to start with you if we can. What is it?
Well, the idea had been bantered around the city of Cambridge for a few years by various community groups. And we were finally just experiencing such a housing crisis in Cambridge. Cambridge is in Waterloo region. We have over 8,000 people on the waiting list for affordable housing. There are 6,000 families, 1,500 families alone. And the wait list for housing in Cambridge is well over 7 years. And so a recent report by the United Way came out and said if municipalities want to tackle a housing crisis effectively, what they can do is make surplus lands and assets available for housing. And so an issue with housing is, well, where are you going to get the land? You can't just pull it out of thin air. So what a city asset is that could be available land is a municipal parking lot. Every city has municipal parking lots. They're controlled by the city, and many of them are underutilized where the parking really isn't used for much of the day. So why not take that parking lot, put in affordable housing that's on pillars, so it's off the ground. You can keep the spots below for that parking that's utilized for the downtown core because the lot is never full. You're saving the spaces, and because you're not going underground, you actually save a lot of the construction costs, you expedite the time. And because that housing is controlled by the city, it's on municipal land, the city can control the type of rent, the type of ownership, the type of affordable housing that's put in that space going forward.
It's super interesting. I hadn't heard of that idea until I read it on Cambridge Today. Brian, is this an idea that's been out there for a while?
The idea of using public land and using city land to build the kind of housing that the market is unwilling or unable to build, we've had a very good track record of doing that 40, 50 years ago. There's good examples in Toronto, such as the St. Lawrence neighborhood, which was built on formerly CN land, so when CN was still a Crown corporation. Still today, I think one of the most innovative and most important neighborhoods in all of Canada, significant non-market housing component, and built on public land. We've forgotten over the last few decades that we can actually do this. You know, what Scott has illustrated, like you retain ownership of the land, you set the rules. We've kind of forgot that that is a successful way of developing the kind of housing that communities need. Mm-hmm. We often defer to the private market. And so much of the housing talk today is about building more market-based supply. And more supply is needed, but we really need to think about what kind of housing we build and for whom. And municipalities, let's be frank, they don't have a whole lot of money to put towards affordable housing. That has to come from higher levels of government, from provincial and federal funding to construct affordable and deeply affordable housing. What municipalities do have is land. And that is what they can bring to the table in this affordable housing discussion, and keep that land in public ownership and use it to build the stuff the market isn't building.
So without simplifying this, and either one of you can jump in, does this not seem like the best of both worlds?
There's a lot to like about this. On the one hand, if we take a sort of bigger city building picture, I mean, one of the worst things that you can have to create a vibrant, thriving urban area is acres and acres of surface parking lots. So if you can repurpose that land to build housing, to build communities, to build populations that will support local businesses, I mean, that is win-win. Sometimes the parking lots can stay, but it's not a requirement. We have a lot of parking in our communities. When it comes to actually developing housing, again, there's housing and there's housing. There's what the market is building, which isn't affordable to a lot of households. So if the market isn't going to do it, you got to find the spaces that you can, and public land is the only spot really where you're going to get significant housing of that kind.
And if I can jump in, it's not just a win-win, it's a win-win-win. Because on the one hand, cities need intensification, they need density in urban cores. Businesses need people living nearby, because if people get into their cars, they're not going to drive for 2 minutes to get down to Main Street. They're going to drive out to Walmart or Costco. And the third is actually utilizing what is prime real estate in an urban core that is empty for the majority of its existence. So many people that have been in favor of this have said, well, that lot down the street is packed 24/7. Maybe don't use that one. Walk 2 blocks up the street and it's a concrete wasteland. Prime urban space where you could have housing, keep the majority of the parking, and all of a sudden you've created the potential for walkable neighborhoods, for public transit to be utilized more effectively, for placemaking activities to occur. Safety goes up because you have more people walking on the streets that are living in a community. Local businesses have their bottom line improved because you have more people walking throughout the neighborhoods. And so the support for this has come from every single corner of the community. It's been unprecedented for me as a city councillor. So church groups, academics such as Dr. Doucet, business leaders, BIAs, the average citizen, and nonprofits have just come out of the woodwork to say, this really has some legs to it. No pun intended. It's an idea worth exploring.
Some stilts to it, as you'd say, right? It's great to hear all the positivity and all the people coming forward thinking it's a great idea. How did it go at City Council when you brought the motion?
well, that's the elephant in the room, I guess. Despite all the support from all those sectors, unfortunately, it didn't pass at Cambridge City Council. And I think in hindsight, I think the surprise from a lot of other municipalities and a lot of other politicians and academics actually catapulted the idea forward in a way that it may not have been as pronounced had it passed at Cambridge Council and had we started looking at that prototype. Because I think other neighboring municipalities like Kitchener looked over and said, wait, that didn't go through. Well, we'll try it. Mm-hmm. The region of Waterloo picked up the ball as well and said, wait, that didn't pass? Okay, well, we'll try it. And now we've just heard, for example, the mayor of Guelph, Cam Guthrie, announcing, Guelph is going to start looking at housing over parking to see if they can utilize those lands as well. So the support has started kind of radiating throughout the province and hopefully the country, all from that one Cambridge City Council meeting where, unfortunately, although things didn't go my way that night, my outlook is, well, what can you do? You've got to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, ask what happened, ask how you can improve the idea going forward. And if you think it's something worth fighting for, to keep pushing for it. So that's exactly what I'm doing.
So what did happen, Scott? I think it lost by a count of 5-4 for the 5 that voted against it. What was their rationale?
Yeah, and again, I'm not here to throw shade or diminish my fellow councillors at all. Like, we all come to our different, we all have our different processes of how we come to make decisions around the council horseshoe. We had some that were concerned that it was going to affect the taxpayer. It was going to cost a lot of money, when really it's the opposite, right? We already pay for the parking lot. We pay for the maintenance, the repairs. And in something like this, you could actually say to a nonprofit developer, look, we're going to basically give you the land for free. We'll lease it to you for $1 a year for 80 years. We retain ownership, but you make the land free, all of a sudden the cost of that build goes down tremendously. Others were worried about losing parking spaces. And the answer to that is simple. Well, you just don't have to put these on a lot that has 100% use all the time. Put it on a lot that is empty for part of its existence or the majority. So Cambridge has about 30 parking lots. Some of those are heavily underutilized. The city of Toronto has over 200 parking lots. I think it's 38,000 parking spaces. Wow. Not every single one of those lots is full. Mm-hmm. So select those lots where this kind of housing would work, where it's close enough to an urban core to increase all the walkability, the safety, the economic benefits we talked about. And it could work. And finally, the last thing is, change is difficult, and this is somewhat unconventional. So people just said, you know what, I don't get it. And that's unfortunate because to me, the way that we progress as a society is by trying new things, innovating. If we have any issues, we troubleshoot them. We take what works and make it better. We take what works and make it better, and we take what isn't working well, and we either improve it or we throw it out the window. We tried. And so every new idea has to come from somewhere. I'm hopeful this will take root. And maybe 20, 30 years from now, it'll just be a normal thing you can do with an underutilized piece of a municipal asset.
Brian, we've seen in all the communities where we have local journalists covering those communities, the homelessness crisis is everywhere now. It's some cities that 10 years ago you never would have seen a tent in the city, for example. In all of those communities, it's becoming a worse and worse problem. Obviously, we see it all over the place. With this idea, I wonder if the bigger conversation too is: Are we moving fast enough to come up with great ideas like this? Why does it seem like nobody can come up with a solution? I guess is my big question.
I mean, I would counter that actually we know what needs to be done. Mm-hmm. We know the solutions that work, and the challenge is actually kind of, as Scott alluded to, is actually implementing and passing things that we know work. We know the idea of building non-market housing on public land is the best way to deliver genuinely affordable housing for low income and moderate income communities, and especially households who are vulnerable to eviction and eventually homelessness. We know this. You speak to housing researchers, this is common knowledge. So, one of the interesting things about this discussion is, for me and many of my colleagues, this is not new. This is stuff that we know works. What's exciting about it is the way that it's coming into the public discourse, into the mainstream conversations, right? And Scott is right. If Cambridge had just passed this, done some research, come back with a report, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this with you today. Because it failed in Cambridge, it has galvanized this idea in many other communities. But many of these communities were already doing something similar. So I live in Kitchener. Kitchener passed a few weeks ago a motion to unanimously support this idea. But Kitchener was already doing this in little bits here and there. There's a great example of a development on Blockline Road, 5 minutes from an LRT station, where the city, again, same principles, a piece of land, they leased it to the YWCA, who got rapid housing financing from the government of Canada. And within the space of about 2 years, you go from this random piece of land that nobody knows what to do with to 2 buildings of supportive housing. This is a fantastic example. What's happening now, what I hope happens now, is that cities develop strategies, right, of trying to think of holistically and comprehensively. We have these assets, what can we do with them? The next step on top of that would actually be thinking about how do we acquire more sites, bring them into public ownership, bring them out of private ownership, and do this on an even bigger scale. But there's all sorts of things like good rent control, tenant protections, building non-market housing. These are things that housing researchers know work. The challenge isn't thinking of the ideas. The challenge is thinking of how to implement them. How do they work politically in a context where for decades we've relied on the market to deliver the bulk of our housing? We've loosened regulations around tenant protection and rent control, and we see the result. Rents rise dramatically, new supply is being built, but it doesn't necessarily meet the demand for shelter that exists in so many communities.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. We all often teach our kids that failure is a good thing, because sometimes good things come out of failure. So this is one of those examples where if it had passed, maybe it wouldn't have had the same the legs. Are you hearing from people all over the country about this, Scott, or are people reaching out to you asking about it?
I've definitely heard a lot of people reaching out from around Ontario, especially Waterloo region. I've heard from Hamilton, Guelph, Toronto. So the idea is definitely spreading around the province. Hopefully it's something that can go nationally. And touching on something Brian said, I think if you're a member of the public, it's very hard to conceptualize a city's strategic plan. If they're going to look at redeveloping a particular road, it's hard to envision how the public transportation is going to work, the architecture, the sidewalks. But everyone knows the concrete wasteland of the city parking lot, and it's so easy to conceptualize putting 3-4 stories of housing above it. It clicks with people. It's easy to get, it's easy to grasp, and the amount of people that have reached out from all over the province saying, this is actually really cool. I'm looking at this parking lot I've parked in for years in a different way because I can keep my spot, put something above it. I mean, I've had landscapers reach out and say how it would save on snow removal and salt. And I've had environmentalists reach out and talk about green roofs and where to store bicycles. And it's just very exciting seeing the flow of positivity from a variety of different people from all walks of life come together to try and transform a piece of urban space in a way that not only helps cities, but provides desperately needed affordable housing to people that truly need it at this point in time.
It's a great conversation, and one that certainly needs to continue. Guys, before we let you go, anything else that Frisco or I didn't touch on that maybe either one of you would like to bring up?
You know, we've been, let's call it what it is. This really is a no-brainer. This really is an idea where there are really very few downsides, and especially if that land is retained in public ownership. I think that's key. You know, these are municipal assets. These are assets that everybody in the community owns, as you know, because they're owned by the city. And the key thing is keeping that in public ownership, because then you retain control over what you can do with it. And you can be ambitious, right? Right now, we get maybe 5% inclusionary zoning, right? 5% affordable in some new developments. On public land, you can be much more ambitious. You can set rules around, you know, how many 3-bedroom units do you want? Do we need more family size units? Do we want to have our own kind of rent control on the rentals? You can sketch out as a city what kind of housing you actually need, and then put that out to proposals from the for-profit developers who might be interested in this, nonprofits, you know, working together to develop a range of housing options that just would not be possible on private land. And when you understand that, you understand there are so many more things that are possible to do that we're just not going to see otherwise.
Scott, final word to you.
What I would add is that a lot of people say, well, this sounds crazy. This type of building must be dangerous and it's too unconventional. And when you look around, these buildings are everywhere. We have buildings on pillars, especially around Cambridge, where there's so much bedrock by the Grand River. You already have buildings built on pillars with the parking underneath them. And it's known that in construction, the deeper you go, the longer it takes, the costlier it's going to get. So there's nothing new about the actual housing on stilts or on pillars. What's new is, as Brian pointed out very well, the city retains control of the land. They can set the terms and conditions of the homes that are built on top of it. And that's essential to remember going forth. If we really want to skirt around the immense difficulties of paying market rent right now, the city has to play a stronger hand. We have the land. It's an extremely valuable urban spaces. And if we want to take our housing crisis to a new place, if we want to get to a better place, then we have to start thinking in new ways and taking different paths. And this, I think, certainly is one that's worth exploring.
All right, Scott Hamilton from Cambridge City Council and Dr. Brian Doucet, Canada Research Chair and Associate Prof at the University of Waterloo. Gentlemen, thanks to you both for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For the latest in in-depth features and enterprise journalism from your local writers at Village Media, be sure to check out The Big Read. The Big Read. It's the full story behind the headlines. Look for The Big Read on your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Back to wrap on another episode of Inside the Village with Michael Friscolanti, Editor-in-Chief here at Village Media, Derek Turner, Executive Producer at the controls. As always, I'm Scott Sexsmith. Who would have thunk? An apartment on stilts. I mean, really, when you think about it, it's genius.
Yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer, like he said.
It is.
Right? Yeah, it's really interesting, and I'm glad. I have to give credit to Doug Coxon, our editor in Cambridge, who sent me a note last week. Said, "Hey, you know, what would be a great podcast? Would be talk about this issue."
Yeah,
because he's covered it in Cambridge, where they've said no, and now in the surrounding areas, they're saying yes. Let's give it a shot. Let's look into this issue. And now in Guelph, the mayor's behind the idea. So it was a great conversation. Something I guarantee a lot of our viewers will have never heard of this. No, certainly. But let us know if you have or if you haven't, and what your thoughts are. You can reach out anytime, 24/7, to either of us, itv@villagemedia.ca. Okay, we're going to pack up and head out. We will be back next week. Thanks for watching. You can catch all back episodes of the program wherever you get your favorite podcasts, and of course across the Village Media Network. For Derek Turner, Michael Friscolanti, I'm Scott Sexsmith. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next Wednesday.
You've been listening to Inside the Village.
Frisco and Scott's Wardrobe, provided in part by Moores, Sault Ste. Marie.